can humanity go back in time? Now, what do I mean by that? That's a pretty broad question. That's a very generic question too. But what I mean is, well, there's definitely a big interest that people have in going back in time. There are entire genres of fiction dedicated to nostalgia, entire trends in fashion, meme pages, all talking about going back to some era or your childhood or something that was a better time. Especially with technology moving so quickly these days, a lot of people want to recapture what it was like to grow up in a different era, right? I stumbled across a video the other day on YouTube. It's like footage of New York in 2000 or something. And even I had to be like, damn, this really makes me feel some type of way. But is it possible? Could humanity do it? Now, right off the bat, my answer is kind of a cop-out. Yes. Yes, we could. But I'm not talking about any sort of Back to the Future time travel type of thing. I'm talking about the power of collective action. In the sense that, technically speaking, the only thing stopping us from going back in time is if everybody were to cast aside their technology right now and just use older devices. You know what I'm saying? Like, if everybody, what's the difference? Right? I talked about that video of New York 2000, but what's the difference between if we actually went back to 2000 or if everybody just set aside their smartphones and set aside all their other gadgets and just pretended like it was 2000 again? Is there really any meaningful difference? Probably not. Now, this has been attempted several times in history by some less than savory political groups. This has been accidentally created in certain societies where they're kind of a bubble and they're kind of insulated, and they use, like, you'll see they use like 90s computers, say it's like North Korea or something. They're using really old-fashioned tech as a way to suppress information from people getting it. So it's not that this has never existed or that this is so impossible, but what I find so interesting about this concept is, why do we want to do this so badly? And also, would this be good? See, I wrote a story maybe about a year ago about this very topic. It's called Antiquita. It's basically, the idea is that these teenagers on this space station in the far future have ordered a package from this company called Antiquita. And what they do is they send old technology from the past. Basically, they're called replicas because there was some big movement in the early 2100, around that time period, of replicating old technology from transitory times. So basically, right before things got perfected, so in the early 2000s, say before you had smartphones that could do so many things, when you had flip phones or slide phones that were like, just around for a few years before they became obsolete, or video games before graphics got perfect, whatever, some form of medium, right? Footage before footage became perfect, like some form of medium that is transitory, and therefore it's limited edition. It's pretty rare because it's something that's not completely old-fashioned, right? It's not like a typewriter or something. It wasn't used for decades. It was only used for a few years before it became obsolete. So there's value in that. And so this company, Antiquita, bought up a bunch of replicas or whatever, and then they just shipped them to people all over the solar system. And mostly the teens are most excited by like the old slide phones where they have to actually type stuff out, text messages, everything's really slow with their hands or whatever. And I won't really give away what happens in the story. It's not a very plot-heavy story. It's more just about the concept. But it's a concept that's fascinating to me. And the thing is that any, futurist, any person who's into technology will tell you, right? If the answer is, should we stop making new technology and go back in time? They'll tell you, no, of course not, because new technology is so helpful. It helps people. To that I say, are you sure about that? Because sure, when new technology comes out, right, you talk about computerized systems and AI that are able to solve problems in medicine is a classic example, or we're able to solve world hunger and feed everyone. You're like, how could you be against that? And from a moral standpoint, from a utilitarian standpoint, you can't. But there are more perspectives than just that. What about, let's say you come up with your fancy, perfect technology, you perfect the world, solve every problem. and then you introduce that to a developing country, and now they missed out on their transitory era. They never had their slide phones and flip phones and like early PC graphics. They never had this stuff. They never got to have their own 80s or 90s or 2000s because you just rushed them into an age of the future. Well, that's kind of unfair to deprive them of that. There's a general moral sense of we shouldn't interfere with a society's development, kind of like the Prime Directive from Star Trek. Good example of this being North Sentinel Island. A lot of people have said, right, it's basically one of the few bastions of Stone Age civilization left on the planet. Basically like a tribal society, whatever, that lives on an island. It's never been contacted. And people say, leave them alone, let them develop. But before I get too off topic, talking about this tangent, could humanity go back in time? And let's just say that we did, and we decided to all cast aside our technology that kind of, makes up for a high-tech world, but also a very busy world where everybody is very active and, it leads to a certain level of social stratification when people just are on their iPhones all day, are working remotely from home. It leads to all sorts of social issues that we're going to have to deal with in the 2020s. That's a video for its own right. But if we all decide collectively, which likely would never be possible, but let's say we did, to only use old school technology, well, basically, like Thanos said, as long as there are those who remember what was, there are those who are unable to imagine what could have been, or I think that's what he said. Like, you couldn't bring people's ideas back in time, So while you could physically make everything back in time, once the genie's out of the bottle, would people want to stay that way? I don't know. I think it's an interesting question. If people could drive around old-fashioned cars and cast aside their Instagram and TikTok and all that and just live in the past, would they even choose to? Or would there be sporadic communities that rise up kind of like the Amish, and those people are just seen as weird? I don't know. But I would say that to anyone watching this video, I think it's a fascinating topic to write about. And I encourage anyone who's interested to explore writing about this topic. To answer the question of the video, so it's not clickbait, no. You can't, it would take too much effort to get everyone to collectively agree to only use past technology, and even if we did, the ideas of present technology would still remain, like Thanos predicted, so the genie's out of the bottle. But it still makes for a great story. That's all. This is basically a channel where I just talk about topics and generally relate them to writing. So tell me what you guys think in the comments, and yeah, that's all.